Right. Good morning, everyone. Or good afternoon. I'll give everyone a couple minutes to log into the Zoom room before we get started. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the city's YouTube page, and then also on the ATLDOT website and the city's Atlanta Vision Zero action plan website. So we'll give everyone another minute or two to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, welcome everyone. This is the first of several community workshops this year as we work with the city to develop its first Vision Zero action plan. So thank you all for joining. We're here today because we all want to learn how we can eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes in the city of Atlanta. And hopefully you all will help commit to helping the city in realizing this goal. So next slide, please. The agenda for today's meeting, we're going to go through introductions of those that you see on the screen, as well as mentioning of some other people that are helping us out. Then we'll go into what is Vision Zero. We'll then hand it off to our partners VHB to go over the high injury network, their approach and findings. After that, we'll discuss how we can prioritize safe streets in Atlanta. Then Blue Cypress who's also a partner with us. They're going to go over how else you can engage with this project and future opportunities to learn about Atlanta Vision Zero. Then we'll discuss next steps with the project and again, how you can get plugged in the coming months. Next slide. Introductions, we have I'll introduce myself first. I'm Chris Puglisi. I'm the project manager. I'm with Tool Design. Betty, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Betty Smoot-Madison. I serve in the role of Mobility Planning Director for the City of Atlanta Department of Transportation. And thanks to everyone for being here.
Amanda.
Afternoon, everyone. Amanda Hatton. I'm with Blue Cypress Consulting, and we are leading the public engagement and close coordination with ATLDOT as well as.
And Ian.
Yes, hi everyone. Ian Hamilton, transportation planner at VHB. We are helping out with the data analysis and high injury network, as Chris was referring to. So great to be with you all today.
Thank you. And then also want to give a special thanks to Selena and Rachel, who you may see on the screen. They're in the background helping move this presentation along swimmingly. So couldn't do this without them today. Next slide. There's going to be a series of Mentimeter questions. If you're unfamiliar with Mentimeter, you can either pull up another tab on your browser, or you could even go to menti.com on your mobile device. You'll input this code that's shown here, 81357121, and there'll be a series of questions when we get to those sections in the presentation. So if you wanted to pull those up in advance, and this way you'll be able to participate and actually see live responses from those in the meeting as we go through those sections in the presentation. So it'll be hopefully easy to use and it'll be very good input for us to use for this project. Also, just wanted to say throughout this presentation, if you happen to hear a term that you don't understand or unfamiliar with, or an acronym, please put a question in the QA box and the moderator will make sure that someone in the presentation answers that question and defines that term for you. So what is Vision Zero? Throughout this presentation, you'll learn what Vision Zero is, as well as its history here in Atlanta and how I'll be developing the city's action plan. You may also hear similar terms used today, such as safe system approach, and we'll go through what that means. But these are sometimes used interchangeably, but they are a little different. Vision Zero is the goal, and safe system approach is how we realize that goal. So at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Betty, who is going to give a brief history of Vision Zero in Atlanta to date.
Thanks, Chris. So currently there are nearly 50 cities in the US that have become official Vision Zero cities, meaning that they have locally adopted legislation or plans and have a public commitment to advancing Vision Zero in their cities. And so we're happy to announce that Atlanta just last year became an official Vision Zero city and is recognized by the Vision Zero network. So that's really exciting for us. Next slide. So I think almost everyone has been or will be impacted in some way by a crash, whether it's that you were injured or someone that you know that has been injured or even killed, or even if it's minor property damage. I think traffic crashes are always an inconvenience in some cases can be deadly. And so that's why Atlanta's Vision Zero program is so important. Regardless of the level of impact, I think it's easy. I think it's safe to say that it's never fun. It leaves you a little shaken up. It impacts your life for that day or maybe even forever, as is the case with many of us, including myself. This work is very personal for ATLDOT, especially as we lost our Vision Zero manager, Kimberly Sargent, last year to a traffic crash. And that really drove home the issue of how dangerous behaviors daily on our streets can really change our lives in an instant. And so as we do this work, I encourage everyone to just remember those that we've lost, and let's continue to be strong in our efforts with Vision Zero. So just a little bit of background. Atlanta's Vision Zero efforts started with a commitment in 2019 through our One Atlanta Strategic Transportation Plan that committed the city to taking every opportunity to make streets safer and to establish a Vision Zero goal. And so in 2020, we adopted the Vision Zero ordinance, which essentially solidified that we would create a Vision Zero action plan and stand up a multidisciplinary safety task force to help in the creation of a multi-year implementation strategy. And that's what this effort is that we're working on. That same ordinance established a default 25-mile-per-hour speed limit on certain streets. And it also adopted NACTO's urban street design standards. For those who may not necessarily be familiar with NACTO, it's the National Association of City Transportation Officials, which is a conglomerate, I guess you could say, of nearly 100 cities and transit agencies across the US that really share best practices and standards for creating safer multimodal streets. While ATLDOT has tons of projects that are actively moving through some phase of the delivery process, from planning and scoping to design to construction, Vision Zero is at the core of how we screen those projects for safety improvements. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time just talking through the various projects that we have going on, but just wanted to mention that, you know, we do have active work and Vision Zero is at the core of those. Again, the first thing I will say is that hiring a Vision Zero manager is really critical for us to drive home our commitment to Vision Zero. And again, with the loss of Kimberly last year, that really put a little bit of a damper in our progress. But we are excited to be moving forward at this point, and we are committed to bringing on a new Vision Zero manager, hopefully in the next couple of months. The actual implementation of our 25-mile-per-hour default speed limit, you may have seen a lot of posted signs being changed by our crews, and we're continuing to really work through that effort. It's not small. It's not a small task to have to change over and install new over 1,000 signs throughout the city. And then we've run into some challenges just with working with our state DOT. And so those are things we're continuing to work through, and we'll hopefully have some really good progress as the year goes by. We've also been able to change city code related to traffic calming, and where traffic calming can be installed. So prior to the stand up of ATLDOT a few years ago, the city code basically restricted us to installing traffic calming on local streets and some collectors, but now we can install those on any street as deemed appropriate through necessary studies or engineering judgment. So that's really good progress that we've been able to make over the last couple of years as well. You may have seen some educational campaigns go up particularly related to the 25 miles per hour. There was a 25 Save Lives campaign. We had billboards across the city, as well as rolling bus ads and some social media posts as well. So we'll continue, especially now that we've got the Vision Zero action plan under development, you'll continue to see various educational campaigns come up as well. And then I think the last thing I will mention is just related to equity. We conducted equity analysis that helped us identify vulnerable communities, or what we're calling communities of concern, based on a variety of data factors, including lack of vehicle access, student and senior population, race, income, single parent households, lack of health insurance, and a few other data indicators. And that really allowed us to use that data as a part of our project prioritization tool that really helped drive the project list for our TSPOS and bond program. So we're really proud of that work, and we'll continue to focus on those communities of concern throughout this work. Next slide, please. Again, Vision Zero and the Safe Systems approach acknowledges that road safety is a shared responsibility that includes government, industry, advocacy, researchers, and the general public, such as yourself. We all play a vital role in part in preventing fatalities and serious injuries on our streets. And so as we work through this process of creating an action plan, we ask for your participation to help us spread the word, to become champions, to talk to your neighbors that we may not necessarily be able to reach, and to commit to safety, just as you see the mayor doing here in this picture. Really, to improve safety on our streets often comes with trade-offs. And I think just having a good understanding of there will be trade-offs in some scenarios, and really keeping vulnerable users at the forefront of our work will really help us to continue driving change on our streets. Next slide. So as we work to create our action plan, the goal is to create a set of multi-year strategies and actions for making systemic changes. And so first, we kicked off our action plan efforts in October of 2022 and had the first task force meeting in December. And we are planning to schedule more meetings with our task force in the coming months. We also are at the beginning stages of public engagement. And so we had our first pop-up event a few weeks ago at Oakland City Station, and that was very successful. We had a lot of traffic come through there that we were really able to engage with people around this effort. And we are planning to continue to host more pop-ups in the coming months, along with a series of workshops such as these, workshops and meetings, just engaging with the general public around Vision Zero, and gathering your input around what's priorities, what's important for you as we continue to push safety. So we'll be working towards having a final action plan by October of 2023. And I think that's it for my slides. So now I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Betty. We have our first series of interactive polling now. So if you please go to menti.com. Again, the code is shown on the screen. I also put a link in the chat. So just that we know you've joined, please hit the heart so that we know that you're participating before we actually move on to the first question. So, all right. About 33 responses we have. We could go to the first question. So this is just to get an idea of who is all in attendance. So do you live, work, or visit Atlanta? Live and work, multiple, so just to get an idea. Great, looks like most people in attendance live here in the city, which is good to hear. Okay, next question. Just to get an idea of where people are. So you kind of put a neighborhood or northwest, southwest, however you want to describe where you live, just so we get an idea of the areas of the city that are being represented today. But it looks like we have a good sampling of people from all over. Okay. All right. Got some good responses. All right. Next question. So now we're going to get a little bit into Vision Zero and how it impacts all of us. So have any of you ever been injured in a traffic crash? Not necessarily seriously injured, but have ever been impacted by a traffic crash in some physical way? So it looks like about half the audience has. So as you can see, this does impact a lot of people. And that's part of this project is not just doing analysis, but actually to interact with people that are impacted by traffic crashes and getting that human element to it. Even several of us on the panel today have been impacted by traffic crashes. So next question. So aside from you, have a family member or close friend ever been killed or seriously injured in a traffic crash? So even though you yourselves were impacted in a traffic crash, it seems like a lot more of you have been personally impacted due to a close friend, family, or relative. So okay. Next question. So this is going to be an open-ended question. I know we haven't dived into Vision Zero or Safe Streets or anything, but before we get started, we just wanted to see, going into this meeting, what does safety on our streets mean to you? Equity, everyone can get where they're going safely and efficiently, ability to walk and cycle safely. Anyone can comfortably walk and bike, being able to move around without fear of serious injury or death. A lot of responses about just being comfortable being on the streets and not in a car seems to be a common thread through here. All ages and ability. Streets for everyone, slow speeds. More complete streets with sidewalks, crosswalks, protected bike paths, making the healthy choice the easy choice. These are all great responses, and hopefully we'll be diving into some of these later in the presentation. Okay, next question. I know Betty sort of gave a brief history of Vision Zero in Atlanta, but before this meeting, how familiar were you with Vision Zero? Oh, good. There's people in here that never heard of it, so that's good. Trying to learn about it. So hopefully this presentation will be helpful for those that are not very familiar with Vision Zero. But those that are, it'll give you insight into how Atlanta's doing in the process. So there'll be something for everyone in this presentation. So next question. I think that might have been the last one. Nope. What does Vision Zero mean to you? Betty just described it earlier in her presentation, but I think it does have different meaning to different people. So how do you interpret Vision Zero? Zero fatalities, mobility choice, life, not getting killed, civic collaboration. If someone's new to Vision Zero and wants to learn everything about it, well, I hope this presentation gives you all the information you need. Designing streets for all users of all ages and all abilities. Good urbanism. Eliminating traffic deaths and reducing injuries. Safe, connected, effective bike lanes. Safer streets fit for everyone, pedestrians and drivers. All great responses. Okay, was that the last question of this polling block, or is there one more? Back to the presentation. Okay. So goals of the Atlanta Vision Zero Action Plan. So our team here that I introduced you to, we're developing the city's first action plan for Vision Zero. So what does that mean? So currently we're in our fact-finding phase. Not only are we performing a systematic safety analysis on the city's street network, which you'll be hearing from in a moment from Ian, but we are also engaging with communities across the city to better understand how people use our streets and their perceived safety issues. So there is the human element of it as well. So later this year, we'll be compiling that information into an action plan, and the city will start using that action plan to make systematic changes to reduce fatalities and serious injuries with the ultimate goal of eliminating them altogether. So what is the action plan? Well, it's comprised of several items that the city and its implementation partners can use to strategize, design, implement, and monitor projects to improve safety. Next slide. So how do we do this? Well, Vision Zero is a new approach on how we plan, design, and develop our transportation system with safety paramount to everything else. So here you see an image of things that we would not like to see on our city streets in the future. This is what we're trying to eliminate here. Next slide. How do we do that? Well, this is the safe system approach. It is a singular system that works together as one. So there are 6 principles that form the basis of the safe system approach. Deaths and serious injuries are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes. Humans are vulnerable. Responsibility is shared. Safety is proactive, and redundancy is crucial. We have developed a Vision Zero task force as part of this action plan and have invited participants that share responsibility in this safe system approach. Remember, this is a singular system, so we all need to work together. So those participants include City of Atlanta staff, state, county, and regional partners, transit partners, hospital and trauma care partners, community advocacy organizations, and implementation partners like our community improvement districts. The objective of the task force is that it will be critical in the development of the action plan so that when it's complete, it's ensuring a sense of ownership by those responsible for seeing it through. So we touch on all the facets that you see here in the one singular safe system approach. Next slide. So how is Vision Zero different? Well, there was the conventional approach as shown on the left, and then the Vision Zero approach as shown on the right. So our traditional or conventional approach towards traffic safety is not working. We've been trying to do this for decades, and here we are trying to rectify what has been done to our streets. So how is the Vision Zero approach different? Well, the conventional approach thought that traffic deaths are just a cost of doing business. We need to get there fast. We need to keep traffic moving. We need to reduce congestion, et cetera. Well, the Vision Zero approach says no, traffic deaths are preventable if we choose to prioritize safety over travel speeds. Traditionally, we've sought to prevent collisions, specifically those that are minor and are a nuisance because they hold up traffic or interrupt their travels as we get around town. Well, the Vision Zero approach focuses specifically on reducing collisions that directly result in fatalities or serious injuries. That conventional approach attributes crashes to human error, whereas we acknowledge that people make mistakes, but when we do make mistakes, it shouldn't result in a fatality or serious injury to themselves or others. So it's that acknowledgement that we're human, we're infallible, and we need to make sure that we design a system for that. Next slide. Paramount to everything else is speed, and controlling vehicle speeds is crucial to the plan. The faster the speed, the more serious the outcome of a crash will be, especially for those that are more vulnerable on the road. Speed creates a feeling of unsafety. The lower the speed also gives us more tools in our toolkit that we can use to help eliminate fatalities and serious injuries in traffic crashes. So you hear us talking a lot about speed throughout this presentation, and then also throughout the development of the action plan. The city started by lowering the speed limit on most city streets, so I'd like to applaud their efforts on that. But it's one thing to lower the speed limit, it's another to design the street for that speed limit. And that's what the action plan will focus on. So the goal of Vision Zero is to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries by eliminating the possibility of someone crashing into someone else at a speed that the human body physically cannot survive. Those speeds are different depending on whether or not that person is in a car or outside of a car. How does that affect our decision-making ability? Well, if we're designing a street where there are no people on foot or bike, then the street can tolerate a higher level of speed. However, if we're looking at a street where there are people on foot or on bike, we need to reduce those travel speeds or create physical separation between cars and people, either by time or by space. So those are the sort of things that we'll be looking at as we develop the Vision Zero action plan, so that the city has the tools and resources they need when looking at specific streets in context. So next slide. Be handing it over to Ian Hamilton to go over some preliminary findings of the high injury network.
Great, thank you, Chris. So like Chris mentioned, I will be discussing the high injury network and just sort of the data analysis approach in general and some of our preliminary findings. So next slide, please. So I think Betty and Chris have already done a great job of outlining the overall importance of why this plan is crucial and what we hope to accomplish with it. But before we dive into a series of maps and charts, I think it is really important just to pause and remember that the polling that we saw earlier, that many people are affected by safety and the issues that we have on public roads. And so unfortunately, the trends aren't going in the right direction over the last few years. But the thing to be said there is Atlanta is certainly not alone. This is a national issue, and many of the issues that Atlanta is facing, many other cities and many other states are facing the exact same trends and exact same issues. And so you can see the chart there on the right. Fatal and serious injuries are increasing in recent years. And certainly the reason behind this plan is so that we're able to take a proactive approach and address these more serious outcomes. So next slide, please. So like Chris mentioned, the high energy network, back in, I believe, 2018, Atlanta put together the city's first high energy network. It's essentially a historic look at traffic crashes over the past few years, and identify those streets where you do see those majority of fatal and serious injuries. And so we've taken a look with updated data, 2017 through 2021, and we've put together a preliminary network. And so you can see some of these issues that have historically occurred in the city. And based on this network that we've put together, certainly not the final, but I'm sure the final will look very similar to this. We're looking at about 75% of fatal and serious injuries on Atlanta streets, including 90%, roughly 90% of fatalities on just these 11% of the city streets. These don't include interstate highways. Interstate highways account for about a quarter to 30% of all fatal and serious injuries in Atlanta. And so this network is really getting at the remaining 75% that the city can really control, and that these projects and these efforts can really dive into. I was hesitant to maybe call out some of the streets, but just want to give you a flavor for some of these roads that I'm sure you've driven on recently, if not over the course of your time in Atlanta. But Piedmont Road, Northside Drive, Ponce and Moreland, obviously, those arterials that carry a lot of traffic. You often see high speeds associated with these roads. And so, no real surprise that these seem to be rising to the top. But again, this is an historic look at crashes. And so the thing to be, keep in mind for this is that it's very reactive, and that it's very sort of, it can tell you where crashes have occurred, where there have been issues, but it doesn't get at that proactive piece that Chris was referring to in the safe system approach. And so next slide, please. And so that's where the systemic analysis and the safe system approach really comes in. Rather than being reactive, rather than being subject to, apologies for the jargon, there's going to be a bit of jargon here in the presentation, but what's called regression to the mean, which means that just because you've seen, a major increase in the past, doesn't mean you're going to see that same level of increase in the future, right? There tends to be, over the course of several years, things average out to a typical condition. And so rather than sort of playing whack-a-mole with historic crashes, ideally what you want to do is take a systemic approach where you are identifying risk as opposed to just looking at crashes themselves. And so you're not excluding crashes entirely from the analysis, but what you're doing with those crashes instead is saying, okay, we want to focus on these streets in particular. We want to focus on these streets with these characteristics. And so we're asking ourselves, what type of crash are we looking at? What type of road do these crashes occur? So whether it's a roadway departure crash, whether it's a speeding related crash, bicyclist or pedestrian related crash, what types of roads are we seeing these on? And then once we have a good idea of those types of roads, we want to ask ourselves, what are the community characteristics of those roadways? Correlation is not causation. So that is not to say that the characteristics of those communities are causing the crashes, but we are saying that there is this relationship between communities that have these characteristics and have these types of roads in them, tend to see a greater share of crashes. And so we should be proactively looking at these communities for opportunities to make improvements. And so again, Chris already did a great job with the safe system approach, but the key word for the systemic analysis is being proactive. So next slide, please. So the first pillar of that systemic approach is focused crash types. And so these are based on the current Georgia Strategic Highway Safety Plan. I'm sure many of you are not familiar with the SHSP, which is totally fine. But essentially what that is a statewide document put together by GDOT and other safety stakeholders in the state. So that could be law enforcement, that could be EMS, that could be local governments. Anybody who has a hand in safety for the community participates in the SHSP. And they define emphasis areas or crash types that they want to focus on, and GDOT can spend federal safety dollars addressing. And so the idea is we are taking those emphasis areas and we're identifying those that are applicable to Atlanta and those that are leading to a greater distribution of or proportion of fatal and serious injuries. And so this chart on the right, you can see these blue bars indicate the proportion of fatal and serious injuries that had that characteristic. And so you can see issues like pedestrians, aggressive driving, roadway departure, impaired driving and speeding all have a strong relationship with more severe outcomes. So again, we're not focusing on the lower severity crashes per se, although as Betty says, every crash is important. The idea is that we really want to target where we're seeing these fatal and serious injuries. And so based on this comparison, we've determined that there are 7 emphasis areas that this action plan is really going to take a look at: aggressive driving and speeding, bicyclists, impaired driving, intersections, motorcyclists, pedestrians, and then roadway departure. So as we sort of walk through what happens next, those are the key crash types that we're focusing on. Next slide, please. So once we have identified our focus emphasis areas, we want to take a look at our focus facility types. And essentially what that is just roadway characteristics. What are the types of roads where you see these emphasis areas occurring? And so this is essentially a comparison of an outcome, again, that emphasis area that we were talking about, and relating it to a piece of exposure. In this case, we're looking at total lane miles of that roadway characteristic in the city. And of course, happy to answer questions, would love to answer questions. But we're doing that comparison. You can see the tables there on the right where we're looking at bicyclists here. We can see that 3 and 4 lanes are really where you see a greater share of bicyclist-related fatal and serious injury crashes. When we look at a concept called functional class, we're really looking at sort of, what is the use of that road? We're seeing them on arterial streets in the city, which matches very well with what we're seeing with the high injury network. But the good thing about this analysis is that we're able to separate key differences between those more vulnerable road users, so bicyclists, pedestrians, and motorcyclists, and then other motorists, right? So the issues facing each road user is going to be different, and we want to be sensitive to those differences. And just as an aside, this approach and these results are aligning really nicely with the Atlanta Metropolitan Region's regional safety strategy, roadway safety strategy. This plan is a 20-county plan that covers not only just the city of Atlanta, but also several counties in the Atlanta metropolitan area. And we'll see in a few minutes mapping exercise related to that. But it's great to see that these plans are aligning really solidly together, and they should be able to complement each other pretty well. So next slide, please. And so I believe this is my final slide, but once we have those emphasis areas and those focus facility types, we will then go through the exercise of identifying specific risk factors on those roadways. So we'll come up with different networks for each emphasis area. So we're looking at different networks for those 7 emphasis areas I listed before. We will do an analysis on each individual facility type. So we'll take those arterials, we'll take those 3 to 4 lane arterials, and we will determine what characteristics lead to greater proportional crashes. Is it traffic characteristics? Is there a transit access component that's important, especially for those pedestrians that are maybe crossing the street to access that bus stop or that MARTA stop? Key destinations, always important. You want to know where people are going or where they're trying to access. And then, of course, as Betty mentioned with those equity concerns, that demographic and socioeconomic information. Again, not saying correlation is causation, but we do often see in more disadvantaged communities a greater share of crashes. And that's often related to the types of facilities that are present in those communities, the types of orientation of destinations and origin points. And again, just to reinforce that this is all able to be done for different crash types. So you can see the maps from the Atlanta Regional Plan, where there's a map for roadway departure there on the left, for pedestrians there in the center, and then bicyclists on the right. And you can see that the risk is very different throughout the geography and on the map for these different emphasis areas. So rather than taking sort of that one-size-fits-all approach with the high injury network, this systemic analysis really allows us to target specific issues, specific facility types, and really get to the heart of what is risk and where could we expect to see improvements. So I believe that's everything with data analysis. Next slide, and I'll hand it back to Chris.
All right, so thank you, Ian. Get a sense of what's coming in the high injury network update. So we look forward to seeing that complete later this month. If you guys go back to menti.com, we have a couple of polling blocks. Now that you've gotten a sense of what Vision Zero is, we have a next series of questions, and then also we're gonna have a little exercise of how you would change some city streets today. So we could start with the first question. So the first question is, what do you think is the greatest cause of traffic danger on Atlanta's streets today? Distracted driving, speeding, cars, road design, no sidewalks, high speed, road engineering. Seems to be a lot of common elements here. Looks like speed and speeding tend to be the most prevalent responses here. SUVs, I see up there. Okay. Okay. These are all great answers. Next question. So now the next question is, who bears the greatest responsibility for reducing traffic danger in the future? I like that several people have said everyone. This is a collective movement here. So, there are no wrong answers. Government, ATLDOT, elected representatives, us, yes, we're all here, so hopefully we're all committed to it. All roadway users. All great answers. See a lot of common responses. Looks like everyone here, we have the right people in this presentation to help address this issue. So, next question. What's the biggest barrier to eliminating traffic fatalities and serious injuries in Atlanta? So, part of this action plan is we need to give the city tools to do this, but what do you think the biggest barriers are going to be once we get past the action plan? Cost, funding? Political will? Road design, right of way? Culture? GDOT. So it seems like you all understand what we need to do, and I think you all understand pretty well some of the challenges that it takes to actually implement this. So NIMBYs. Great responses. All right. Next question. So as part of developing the Atlanta Vision Zero Action Plan, we need the city to commit to a date of when they want to realistically achieve fatalities and serious injuries This is not unheard of. This has been done not only in cities in Europe, but even in the US, there's been 1 or 2 cities that have already realized 0 fatalities on their streets. So this is a very realistic goal. And part of the action plan is to help set that target date. So many of you think we can do it in 2 years. Most of you think by the end of the decade. A couple of you are less optimistic. But it seems like most in this Zoom room think we could do it within the next 10 years. So that's good to see that we're all committed to doing this. All right, next question. I think the next part of the presentation is about safer street design. Rachel, can you pull up the presentation? So prioritizing safe streets in Atlanta. So what does that mean? Next slide. Part of this action plan is to systematically look at street facility types and what we can do to make it safe for all users. So here's a picture of what is a conventional bike lane on a multi-lane street. To me, this doesn't appear to be extremely safe, and obstructed sidewalks. So these are things that we'll hopefully put in our toolkit to make better. And so part of this next polling block, we're going to look at a few different street types and ask you what you think you can do to make them better. So next slide. So we're going to go right back to the Menti, but this is where I think you'll all have a bit of fun in helping change some of the streets in Atlanta together. So we could probably go to the first one. So here is Peachtree Street in South Downtown. So what safety improvements do you think we could make to make this street just feel safer? So bike lanes, reduce vehicle travel lanes, add street trees, restripe the street. Lane reduction, wider lanes, bike lanes, better street lighting, road diet, raised curbs, tighter lanes, make it 3 lanes and add bulb outs and street trees. These are all great responses, and through the magic of television, let's transform this street. Next question. There we go. We just took some of your responses. We added a little median. We did a lane reduction. We added some bulb outs, restriped it. So using some of your responses. So do these new conditions feel safer? Safer being the operative word here. All right, so about 60% of you say it does feel safer than the original condition. All right, let's go to the next street and see what we can do to improve it. So here is a stop controlled intersection at a one-way street. What would we do here to fix this intersection and make it feel safer? Rachel, I'm not seeing any of the responses. Well, we could imagine they're all great responses, similar to the others. Surely we can see what we can do to fix the street. Next slide. So do these new conditions feel safer? Looks like the street was restored to two-way. Bulb outs were added. The crosswalk was shortened. A more visible stop sign was added. Fresh paint. So seems like most people feel that this condition is safer than what was previously said. Hopefully you saw some things here that you suggested for improvement. All right, here is a 6-lane Strode. What would you do to improve this corridor? Lane reduction, remove lanes, add a bus lane, bike lanes, road diet, remove it, lower speed limit. So see a lot of reduced lanes as a common response. So hopefully through this exercise, you see some of the challenges that we all have with, competing ideas for what needs to happen on each road. And this is sort of the, as we move forward, these are the decisions that need to be made. So let's see what we can do to this street or what has been done to this street. Next slide. So again, does it feel safer? Most of you think no, it doesn't feel safer. Some of you do. I think we all know what street this is. I think we have one or two more ones to do. Want to go to the next one? So here's a residential street. What safety improvements could we do along the street to make it feel safer? Sidewalks, narrower lanes, add sidewalks, sharrows. I'm glad you all caught that there were no sidewalks on this street. So this one's a good example because earlier, a lot of you identified as funding or cost to being a huge roadblock to making our streets safer. So this is a great example of a low cost improvement to the street that I think addresses a lot of the improvements you'd like to see. So let's see what we can do. Next slide. So here with some paint and some vertical separation, we actually added a walking zone along the street that also narrowed the lanes. So do these new conditions feel safer for this residential neighborhood? So these are the types of things that we can put in our toolkit to get safety improvements done quickly and at low cost, and improve our streets at a much quicker rate than waiting for larger capital projects. So most of you feel that this does feel safer, which is good. I think we have one more. Here's another residential street with on-street parking. So what changes here do you think could be made along this residential street to make its residents feel safer? So narrowing lanes, add sidewalks, trim bushes, add bike lanes, stop signs. Right. Seems like a lot of common responses here. So let's see what we've done. So here we've narrowed the lanes a bit and added buffered parking, better striping, trim the bushes. So does this feel safer? And most of you agree. So I mean to cut short, but I do want to move on to the next part of the presentation. So this is another question. Yeah. So I do want to hand it over to Amanda because we only have 5 minutes left. So if you could advance to those slides, Rachel. She's going to talk about how you can stay involved with us.
All right, so I am going to circle back on several things that Betty already mentioned, because hearing from you all and all the different voices of Atlanta is super important to this process. As Betty noted when we first got started with the meeting, we are focused, our approach to engagement, switch to next slide, Rachel. We are focused on an equity approach in the way that we're handling outreach, and we are focusing all of our in-person touch points in areas where there are communities of concern. So we alluded to earlier, there's 23 of those that we've mapped out. They're focused in 8 of our MPUs, and 3 in particular, there's a greater focus. So some of the activities that we're doing, the pop-up events, we already held 1. We're going to hold 3 more. We are looking to hold those in those communities of concern. We alluded to earlier that our next pop-up event is planned for March or April, and we are holding that at Adams Park. We are really excited. You're going to want to get on our outreach list to make sure that you hear updates about some special events being coordinated with that. Right now, we do also have MPU materials available. If you are interested in bringing this to your neighborhood, to your MPU, we have a presentation that can be shared to help bring awareness to the project. Also live right now is our community input map, which we'll share in a minute. But that is an easy way for folks to jump on for 5 minutes and provide feedback on safety issues or concerns in their area without having to sit through a meeting, and they can easily share it with their network. And we do have more workshops that are planned. Those are planned for March and April. In May. We are focusing those on, again, those communities of concern and targeting certain neighborhoods. We'll also be coming back for 1 more round in the summertime. So most of our public input events will be happening through midsummer, and then we'll be coming back with recommendations in early September for the public to provide input on before we finalize the action plan. I do want to note that Ian spoke earlier to the High Injury Network. We are looking to engage community partners in those high injury locations as that area is focused. So that's something you'll be seeing us focus on over the next month, is engaging with groups in those areas. So if you saw the area around you as one of those where there were a lot of high injury crashes, certainly feel free to reach out to us to identify ways that y'all can help engage with your community. On the next slide, we're featuring the map that is live on the project website right now, ATL Vision Zero. It's also in the chat. Hopefully most of y'all have been to that website. This is a map you can get to easily by just clicking the engage page, and it's partly down, halfway down the page after the announcement about these workshops. Really easy to share this, really easy to participate. On the next slide, we want to emphasize how important it is to hear your stories. This is really about humanizing the experiences we all have in the city of Atlanta and how the streets have impacted us and how they can be considered differently in the future. So if you have a story to share, please reach out to us, ATLDOT at atlanta.ga.gov. Again, that contact information is on the website. We can also add it to the chat here. We encourage you to really help extend our reach. I do want to remind everyone that there's another live webinar on this Thursday from 6 to 7. So please help get the word out. If folks are unable to make that meeting, we will be posting the recordings of both of these meetings so folks can see what was shared, the ideas we collected, and if they have anything to add, again, folks can email us and go on the map online. Last request, please sign up for our outreach list if you haven't, and we have about 260 people on our outreach list right now. We've reached over 800 unique users on our website, and we've received over 1,800 comments on the input map, but we want to double, triple those numbers. The more information we have, the better we can tie that into the technical information and get a plan that really works for all of Atlanta. And I'll hand it back to Chris to wrap us up.
Yep. In the interest of time, thank you all for joining. If you have any outstanding questions, they'll be answered and published on the website. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to on the website. There's a place where you can ask questions. So thank you all for your time today, and we'll hope to see you at our next event. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Bye.